Okay, so this is about delivering the content, and when we talk about delivering content in an OTT fashion, that means a lot of things, an almost infinite number of things about the way content is delivered. And I'm not going to bore you with the details. I have a CDN background and a workflow background and that kind of thing, but the simple fact is, to deliver OTT content, you're looking at not just a single stream of video that goes down into a pipe. You're looking at dozens or even hundreds of versions of that same video to reach the viewers on all of these different devices and pretty much everywhere. So what I want to do here is, I'm not going to go into the details of tech. This isn't a tech discussion. It might be the most techy panel that we have today, but I sort of want to talk about where we're going and some of the limitations that OTT has and some of the ways we're actually going to face those. So first, I'd like to have our speakers introduce themselves. You've met Eric. Thank you, Eric, for a fantastic presentation case study. And you have a mic, right?
I do. Is it on?
It's on.
I'm Joe Schaefer. I'm the National Ad Sales Director for the Country Network.
Thank you, Joe.
I'm not Tim Eaton. He's not here today, so you get me.
Very good, Joe. And then we have
Chris Wagner
Chris?
with OTT Advisors, formerly New Lion. So happy to be here.
and John.
I'm John Lawson, Executive Director of the AWARN Alliance, which is using next generation television to create an advanced emergency alerting and news and information service.
Okay. So here's the question. If you were going to start a direct-to-consumer service today, where do you start in considering the technical delivery of that content? Do you go to a complete online video platform like a Brightcove where you kind of walk up with your content and you say, here it is, and you make this happen? Or do you go to a company like Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure and you kind of try to do it yourself and you hire out some engineers who love to play with tools and cloud-based solutions and that kind of thing? Or do you do something else? And my question is, how is it different maybe today versus how it might have been about 3 years ago, right? If you were starting now versus 3 years ago, is it different? Maybe I could start with Chris, yeah?
Sure. Well, New Lion, when we started back in 2006, there was no Roku box, there was no Apple TV box. You had people saying, watch TV on your phone. That'll never happen. So I think what's changed over time is it's the people that companies have to help run these OTT services. So one of the key questions to how you build out your own tech stack is a question first about the type of content. Do you have live content? Do you have linear content that are TV channels? Do you have, are you primarily a VOD service? And the answer to those three questions kind of dictates the type of tech stack you're going to want to move to or adopt. I think the other question is really the type of people you have in your shop, right? An OTT direct-to-consumer service requires good marketing people, how to use data to attract and retain subscribers. You need good product management people, getting feedback from people that use the product and how can we advance, add new features, continue to build out the experience. Do you have product management people like that? And then as you continue down the stack, you start getting into the operational side of things. So you have the right operational people to handle video workflows. And a video workflow would be, the origin of your videos, how you use a multi-CDN setup to deliver down to the ISP, which ultimately is the consumer. Then you add the complexity to all the different devices. You got to add apps to those devices. You got to check the quality of the video delivery to each of those devices. So the video workflow side kind of brings a bunch of operational needs there. So it's kind of an assessment of those kind of two big things: the type of content you have and the type of people you have. And depending on those answers, You can build your own stack, which, I would say 3, 5, 6 years ago, there were limited players there. There are absolutely more players now if you wanted to build your own tech stack. Or you could work with a managed service provider, right? A managed service provider would be an Endeavor Streaming, a Delta Tray, probably Brightcove, which is more of a VOD shop than live. But those are kind of the decisions you have to make. There's also some cost considerations there. So CapEx and OpEx is very different between managed service providers and building out your own stack. So how much money do you have? You have to look at those kind of things.
So if you were starting off a service on your own, you weren't totally confident, but you kind of want to wade into sort of a direct consumer niche.
Yeah, I have a network now that is coming off of YouTube, Kids Network.
Okay.
They're going to start their own owned and operated service. They're really content guys, and marketing people. They don't have any of the expertise, the other levels of people that I've talked about. They actually aren't starting with their own direct-to-consumer service first. They're going to start with a syndicated service first. So they're going to build a video player. They're going to put content in a video player. That video player is going to move across multiple publishers. They're going to build an ad business around that first. It's kind of the outside of the wheel. Then they're going to move inside and build their own owned and operated D2C service. So they're actually doing syndication before that. And they're going to work with as few tech companies as possible. Because when you're a small business, the more tech companies you work with, it's just hard to manage. It's difficult to pay them. There's a lot of project management issues. There's a lot of getting everybody together to try to resolve things.
So would you say it's probably easier to start up a direct-to-consumer niche service today than it was 3 years ago?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
If you're in the VOD business, infinitely simpler, right? Video workflow now with AWS or Azure or Google for VOD platforms is really a lot simpler when you think about how you do encoding, transcoding, packaging, adaptive bitrate streaming. All that stuff has gotten so much easier than it was 5 years ago. If you're in the live event business, a little bit different there, right? Because you have to staff that differently. I know that's a question you're going to have later that we can talk about. If you're in the linear channel business and those channels are up 24/7, that also institutes a little bit more support that you have to have, which is different from the guys with VOD, right? Netflix is a VOD service, obviously a good one. But that usage gets spread out. You don't have these big tentpole events like live events, and you don't have, channel issues when you're on a device that may be, audio, visual, out of sync stuff that you would need some type of a technical operation person to call.
Thanks. So I'd like to shift a little bit and ask John about the Country Network and comparing and contrasting the live linear versus VOD and the complexity of that.
Let me give you a little background. We're an innovative music video network dedicated to providing today's country music fans with more choices in television and digital programming. To that end, we produce a large amount of high-quality original content. We have offices in Fort Worth, Texas, and Nashville, Tennessee. We work closely with the record labels and the artists to produce vast amount of original content, which we have, and we need to get out there. In fact, next week, or in the next few weeks, we'll be at CMA Fan Fest in Nashville. The entire week we'll be at a club, which Margaritaville in Nashville. We'll be filming high-quality original content the entire week. The challenge we have is to ensure that we are utilizing the most efficient CDNs to get that content out. In the past, under our old management, we were pretty much an OTA-only distribution model, linear TV. Now more than ever, OTT has become a major part of our distribution model. With all this high-quality content, which we actually own, we want to make sure it gets out there the best way possible. So that's kind of how we fit in here, this sense. OTT, you could find us on Roku. It's becoming an increasingly big part of our business model. We have our own IP infrastructure we've built out in Fort Worth to help the distribution of that. And from an ad perspective, on my side, it's increasingly important to get our high-quality content out there to as many consumers, as many modes as possible as they're watching video. And nowadays, as you know, that could be anywhere. And we want to be able to turn on a dime and be able to get our content out there. So that's kind of how we fit into this.
But what's the difference between live and on-demand content? Eric would know, right? You want to answer that one?
I mean, you said the difference between live and automated?
Well, what are the question was, what's
Live linear versus
live linear
VOD.
versus VOD, you know, what's the difference?
And the complexity, if you were going to launch a new
Well,
service.
our VOD, which we also do, that separate feed from our linear and our HD and 4K models,
Okay.
and different advertising models as well. Right now, the advertising, which is our major form of revenue, it's on the linear channels. It's also, if you watch it on OTT Roku, you're going to see your ads. We also stream live online at tcncountry.com. So all that advertising that's on the linear channel is on the digital as well,
And
on the OTT.
I think that's one of the challenges.
And
that we've
moving
seen.
forward, we're going to have more challenges with that. You know, we're a growing network, so we're working out the way we're moving forward. Right now, we're not doing any advertising on our VOD yet.
Right.
But as we build up our IP infrastructure, that's definitely in the future.
Ad insertion on live linear feeds can be very complicated, especially if you want to personalize it. So I still see.
Yeah,
that
well, I
as a
think that's one of the big
challenge.
if it's a technical question, right?
Yeah.
Doing ad stitching for local avails and national avails by device and by your physical location, so that it's stitched in the streams, no pop-up blockers, and the sales guys can have a national and a local load and to sell as avails, makes the linear stuff more complicated than VOD, because VOD, you don't have the same discipline, right? On live events, you also have people all showing up at the same time, which you don't have in the VOD world. Maybe, well, you don't. Game of Thrones would be different because everybody watched it at the same time. But if you have a big NFL game, a UFC fight, or something like that, it's just like a regular stadium. Everybody kind of shows up at the time of the event. So you have to get people authenticated. You have to get them, make sure they get a password on a login. You have to check their entitlements. You may have to check against the pay TV operator and whether they're in good standing to let them through the front door. So that becomes a technical challenge that's very different than VOD.
Great. Thank you very much. Let's shift to the Trender panel. I remember, gosh, going back about 5 years ago when buffer rage was a thing, right? People got upset at their phones because the video wouldn't play or whatever. I made a bit of a joke about it at the time. How do you feel the quality of the video delivery to you is today? Do you find it a lot easier to get the content that you want and play it, on any device, or are there still a lot of frustrating moments? Would you say it's really better?
I'd say in general, yeah, like really good. These days, like I hardly ever have to wait, can almost instantly watch anything I want to watch. And that's a pretty big contrast to even a couple years ago.
Yeah, and I would say maybe I could get some comments from the other panelists here about that.
Sure,
Yeah.
I would agree. I think that over time the quality does become better, but I would say a pain point for me in terms of quality would be on public transportation. Anytime I take a train anywhere, for some reason, I'm not able to really get a video stream like I would if I were home on my own Wi-Fi
All right,
network.
so we're going to have to talk to all those city planners out there about
So
making sure streaming works on those trains if they want people on them. Okay.
I mean that's a time where I can actually sit and focus on a program.
What about the
while
downloading?
I am on the go on my phone.
What about downloading though? Do you ever take advantage of the downloading capability in advance, or is it just planning ahead isn't something that you really want to do?
With video, no. With music, yes.
Okay, makes sense. Good. Donna.
Yes, definitely a huge improvement, but I still have problems, but not, I wouldn't call it painful, but with certain things I do.
So it's occasional.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so I think the industry in general has come a tremendous distance in terms of picking up the quality game. So a lot of people in this room might even have had something to do with the decisions that were made to make that happen. So I applaud you also. Here's a question. We've heard about multicast streaming for years, and everybody talks about the big Super Bowl event. Now, there's not a lot of Super Bowl events, right? But when they happen, if you were actually going to try to run 100 million viewers on the same stream through the core of the internet, it would still break today. You're not going to be able to move that traffic into the internet's core. And so, since I've been working in this industry, multicast or using some kind of multicast distribution system has been talked about, but has never really taken hold outside of, proprietary networks. And so the question is, are there any emerging technologies? First of all, do we think multicast is ever going to really happen in the internet world, or is something else going to happen? And maybe I'd like to start with, let's start with John over there on the end.
Yeah, I think the scaling issue. One of the questions was, is ATSC 3.0 or next generation television, is it in any way competitive with OTT? I think they're enormously complementary, because with broadcast next gen, there are no scaling issues. There's no congestion. There is no buffering. As far as the system is concerned, it can be 10 million devices or none, and the receivers are all going to receive it at the same time. With NextGen, we'll be able to put a signal across multiple devices at the same time. The South Koreans launched the system last year so their people could see their Winter Olympics in 4K. So imagine a system having multiple transmitters in your market that can simultaneously broadcast ultra-high definition, and most TV sets sold in the US today are 4K, can natively broadcast 4K, multiple services of 4K, and in terms of multimedia or D2 multicasting, they're in high definition. There's a lot of SD content that you can't get on cable, but you can with an antenna. That's going to be available with deep indoor penetration for mobile devices. It's superb for connected cars. So there is a market today for multicasting. Most people don't ever see these channels because you do have to have an antenna, but in the future, it's going to be very easy for consumers to access these channels, and I think it works beautifully with OTT for other content that is not necessarily a mass market. With ATSC 3, you're not going to ever crash the last minute of the Toronto Raptors playoff game. But
so, John, maybe I could just, for the audience's sake, they may not be terribly familiar with ATSC 3.0, but it's basically a digital transmission standard for the next generation of broadcast television, but it's based on IP. And if we all had devices that had a receiver, just like the antenna for digital TV under ATSC 1.0, that's basically how your TV works if you plug the antenna in. There's an emerging standard called ATSC 3.0, which could do the same thing. And the potential, some of the arguments that I've seen is that ATSC 3.0 broadcast or terrestrial broadcast could be used for those large events like Super Bowls, and you could have devices that would do that and be able to stream video on demand or the unicast things. Now, there are many arguments either way, and there's cost aspects to it, and there's a lot of things here. And it looks to me like Chris is chomping at the bit to make a comment here.
Well,
Let's try to keep it brief because we're running out of time.
Yeah, the biggest disadvantage is you can't do personalized advertising. So multicast is kind of one ad to everybody.
Yep.
When you do an IP-based ad, you can personalize it for the individual, and that's where the industry wants to go with all the data.
Mm-hmm.
I think multicast inside of a venue works today and will be the first real big implementation. So if you're at, in Nebraska University watching a football game, that's a Cisco multicast Wi-Fi network in there. So being able to multicast in high-dense areas like stadiums will be there. Definitely.
So for live events in a controlled network environment, multicast is pretty much a standard today.
Yeah, well, everything's going to go IP. So the question is, do you want to give up personalized advertising?
Okay.
But the thing about 3.0, you have to understand, it's not just better pictures. It is all IP. It's the world's first all IP digital television transmission system So it does open the door to geo-targeting, to some level of customization, and that's where I think the complementary nature with OTT is, where there can be a division of labor between the two.
I'd just like to throw out a real-world example that
Please.
just happened. So the question, I think, started about multicast on the internet, which is not going to happen. The internet's not set up for that, just to clarify that point. Peer-to-peer networks aside and that stuff. CDN still went. We just had a recent event that sent a world record that was in conjunction with Amazon's new Media Connect service in India, where they got 18.6 million concurrent viewers. That's over the internet to a CDN to the clients. And Chris points out, monetizing these events requires the way that you sell the ads and manage all of the, whether it's a pay-per-view. And if you watch some of the, probably what the panel's pain points have been, it's not the technical broadcast ability, it's things like paywall and e-commerce areas. So when you go to register for on your cable company, they have your bill. It's very easy to say, give me that UFC fight. But when I have to go online and we don't know how many people are going to show up, like 18.6 million, this is where things get interesting in the industry. But I think we all believe in the standards of an ATSC 3.0, but in the meantime, the industry is going to evolve. And right now, we have the tool sets that can deliver almost 20 million people, and I promise you next year it'll be 30.
So this will be an interesting thing to watch over the course of the next year or two. I'm going to move on to just one other topic that I'd like to cover, and it has to do with contribution and distribution side of traditional broadcast TV. We know that satellites have been a key element in the infrastructure, especially when we talk about live linear content, right? The broadcasters send things up to the bird, they distribute it out over, the West Coast, East Coast, that kind of thing. And I'm a little bit curious, the benefits of IP have been, and terrestrial fiber and that kind of thing have been apparent in a lot of different places, but I think still you see the satellites. And I'm a little bit curious at this point, and I'd like to pose this to Eric. Where are we in terms of the continued use of satellites as sort of a primary way of delivering?
No, it's a big point. We've seen a lot of satellite replacement in the last couple of years. It's being driven by a number of factors. I joke that 2020 is the Y2K of satellite, just in that numerous contracts through SD and HD are coming up, and they are significant cost factors. It's still a very economic and efficient way to broadcast a single signal, but it's very difficult to customize it. It's not great future-proof. So the CFO wants to see the instant ROI of getting rid of the satellite and the bird, and they run between 1.2 million and 1.8 million on any given transponder. We are watching those come off and people jump onto the internet. NBC did that with all the regional sports networks with us. But the broader picture, I think, is the ability that you can customize and you can deliver, and that you're going to see mixtures of fiber, internet, all IP, and then as that goes, there'll be places for satellite, but the satellite companies themselves are looking at, I think, different ways to play that.
Okay. That's interesting, because I know growing up, it was always that's the future, that's the big communication.
You get
Well, you also-
Netflix,
sorry,
you get
one more
Netflix on Dish or DirecTV?
I don't.
Yeah.
I
But
don't
you
think
also
you
have to
can.
deal with the 5G aspect. So one of the things that we haven't touched on just quickly is to the problem of I can't get it in my subway and how good is it going to be. 5G is coming, the US a little behind, but rolling out nicely in Japan and Korea, et cetera, and we'll be here. You're going to go from a couple hundred megabits to 20 gigabits of availability, and you're going to get a much prettier picture at source, and you're going to have a much prettier picture on the delivery point. And I think that's going to start to change things, and it
It
puts a lot of
fixes your
pressure.
train problem.
It does, and at a level that you won't believe. You've never seen a picture like that, and it's going to definitely put a lot of pressure on what satellite can deliver because you're going to be using all the antenna infrastructure globally.
So 5G, fiber, ATSC 3.0, hey, this battle's just actually getting started, isn't it?
Oh yeah, and large players. That's why you're watching people like AT&T acquire Time Warner to Warner Media. You've got Comcast picked up NBC, and Verizon is going to position itself as a neutral provider to content people.
All
as
right.
an example.
Lots of fun ahead. I'm going to open things up for questions here. Do we have any questions? We have no questions. There's a question.
There we go.
Hi, it's Barbara Bellafiore here, Bell Communications. I just want to follow up on this distribution question, and we talked about it in the last panel. I just wondered if you could help me understand. If all these new things come soon and they work, et cetera, is it still what used to be called cable operators are now called MVPDs? Are they still going to be the ones that own the whole access to the consumer?
I'll jump in first. Chris, I'm
Please
sure,
do.
has a lot of points. The short answer is that the reach of the cable community is still quite vast. You have $75 billion in broadcast dollars in North America alone to $50 billion globally. Nobody wants to jump to nothing. The proverbial broadcast dollar used to contrast with an internet dime, and those are starting to equalize. I think that you're going to see the use of the spectrum that is in the cable move from just having programming to giving you more connectivity, and that will be its own separate issue, and that these companies are going to find ways to combine that internet connectivity with a programming set of options that's just starting to proliferate. You're going to see an awful lot of options to the consumer.
And so what about 5G? Who distributes 5G to us? Will it be the telephone transmitters or the cable? Where does that come in?
Well, you're going to get different players. I mean, Verizon, as Eric was talking about earlier, is banking on 5G as a transport platform for content providers. So content owners have a lot more leverage now because distribution's been disintermediated and it's gotten a lot cheaper. So that's why you have the big cable guys acquiring content rights. That's why AT&T bought Time Warner. If you look at Sinclair's $10 billion acquisition of the Fox RSNs, it's all about content.
Yep.
So as a small content owner or a big content owner, you have a lot more leverage now to syndicate your content or distribute your content direct to consumer. The pipes become more a utility. 5G becomes a huge pipe, but it's still a pipe. And I think distribution is just easier, faster, and cheaper. So owning content or owning content rights, you have a lot more power than you did before.
I ask it, I'm from the cable industry originally, HBO and Showtime and other networks. And when first the bellheads came into the media world, people thought, oh, what are they going to do here? And it was the idea that they were going to erode the cable industry's connection to the consumer and then Dish as well. And it never seems to have gotten to be more than 20%. And I just wonder if you think that that same relationship is going to hold, that really it is the original cable industry that keeps the consumer connected.
I just added in on the Verizon experience, say with Fios. They ran into certain economic limitations as to how much fiber you could run. So your only next step really is a wireless option a la 5G, which will take some time. And in that, you'll see improvements. But I think the fundamental point is you're going to move from paying for the programming on your cable to paying to the connectivity access, which is still going to cost $150.
Yeah, I'm like
no matter
Altice
what.
bought Cheddar, right? That $300 million deal with Cheddar was a pure content play because they recognize they're turning into utility, right? So you have to ask, do you want to be a utility company or do you want to be a content provider, right? And
No,
that's
they described themselves, Cheddar, as a post-cable property, and they were acquired by a cable property. So,
Thanks
and
so
it's
much.
the same thing, to your point, on the Viacom with Pluto, which established itself at a $340 million exit as an ad-driven service.
So it sounds like we're getting to the content is king type of statement, or reiteration of the statement. And I'm sure the Country Network would agree.
We agree. That's why we own our original content. We keep producing more of it. We also run, on our network, music videos that we don't own. But having the ability to own and produce high-quality content of our own gives us a lot of leverage in the business, and that's kind of what we're focusing on as we grow. All our VOD right now are all our original programs, some of which have won Telly Awards in the past. So it's high-quality content, and back to your point about streaming, it does look really good nowadays. The technology is there now, I believe, and if Tim were here, he'd say content is king, and owning it is the best thing we could do.
All right. Other questions? Other question?
Hi, I'm Nick from Tether.io, pre-release startup. Going back to the beginning, if you're starting a OTT, ad-supported OTT, how would you handle the ad sales and serving if you were doing it from scratch now?
Yeah, I actually have a customer doing that. You got to find a couple of good demand partners that have a strong ad network, that you can leverage. I mean, you obviously can go to the ad networks like SpotX or somebody like that to fill inventory, but you have to build your branding, you have to build your traffic. So that was my point earlier about syndication. If you can find a good demand partner and a group of publishers to partner with who are always interested in content, and if you can play that content out and build, some pre-roll video around it and get some meaningful impressions, you can build your business up and then launch your owned and operated site. I do think syndication, because you can index now, which drives better search, and all these OTT companies are looking for content, right? So why not play in all those stores as a syndication strategy, as long as you can search and index your content so it's, so that it's actually relevant in those stores, and then drive it back to your own and operated site as step 2, I think is the best way to start. And this group I'm talking about is launching a kids channel. And they were predominantly YouTube, and they just didn't like the rev share deal at YouTube. They wanted their own data. They wanted to know who their audience is, but they're going to start with syndication first and then move second step to launching their own site.
But I think, Chris, you hit a really big point on that last statement, in that absolutely start syndication. You do have many models on how you can morph today with what I would call macro solutions. You can, touch a freewheel. You can go into Amazon and use them as you need it. But up until now, content owners have been really blind to what the audience is really doing. I mean, the whole Nielsen ratings is based on someone telling you that their demographic kind of had an impression for people who, and frankly, aren't there. I mean, so moving this to where you can tell an ad sales unit and understand what you connected on impressions directly to the audience, those tools have never been cheaper, more available, and will only get more powerful over time.
I think we ran out of time. And the best part was the conversation was just keeping going here. Excellent. So there's a lot to speak about in the delivery side of things and the distribution side of things. And I'm excited to see how this whole battle plays out over the next 3 to 5 years. Okay, thank you, everybody. Thank you, panelists.